All right, good evening. Welcome to episode 19 of Beer and Bastards. We're here with the great child prodigy Matt Palumbo, author of 2 leather-bound books, in defense of classical liberalism and A Conscience of a Young Conservative, also an admin at Being Classically Liberal, and just about every other page on Facebook. We also have Kevin Ryan, who got a new do. Either that or he joined the National Guard, which I doubt because he's loaded. Look at his French doors and his foyer.
Every single
And
show.
that new ceiling fan. Look at that nice ceiling fan. God, the 1%er. It's admin of Unbiased America, an excellent page. You know, from some people's perspective, other people's perspective, it's not so awesome. You can
You're an
include me in
admin
that
there
group.
too, buddy.
And we also have Grant Phillips, the purveyor of the Modern Libertarian, as well as an admin at We Are Capitalists. His writing is excellent. I'd advise you to look at it on the Modern Libertarian website. There's some good information there. I hate him, but his writing is pretty good.
We all hate you too, Will.
Yeah. Also, we have a guest, Christy Reed. She is has a degree in petroleum engineering from Texas A&M University, and we're going to talk a little bit about fracking today. The left loves fracking and oil, as we all know. They've come up with an awful lot of myths. I think a lot of them stem from that movie Gasland, which has been debunked numerous times. Yet the myths stay with us. You currently work in the petroleum industry. Do you get a lot of flack? And you're in California. Do you get a lot of flack from environmentalist groups now,
Yes.
due to the myths maybe perpetuated by that movie?
Oh yeah, we're constantly dealing with environmental groups that are trying to attack our operations, and just not even just environmental groups, but just the general public.
Okay, just the public at large. They know little
Yeah,
about fracking.
it seems like everybody has seen Gasland, and everybody thinks that it's true. So we get just a lot of flack from all sides.
Didn't they make another movie that just absolutely debunked everything that happened in that?
Yeah, it's a really good documentary called Frack Nation. So I really recommend that one as like an alternative to the Josh Fox Gasland.
Okay, you know who did a good piece on it too is John Stossel. He did it on his
Okay.
show, and he wrote a piece on it as well. But it's like no one really cares about the truth. They just pick up. I think the left in general, and I would be interesting to get Kevin's view on this. The left in general despises oil because it's the fuel it's the engine behind capitalism, and they despise capitalism and production. Kevin, would you agree with that, or am I being a conspiracy theorist again?
No, that's 100% true. I mean, if you look at almost everything that it's certainly the environmental wing of the left, Greens and so forth, almost everything they do is aimed at reducing U.S. use of oil and production of oil. I mean, pipelines, they're attacking the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, based on what they say is it's going to be too dangerous. It has nothing to do with danger. They just don't want more oil getting into the system.
Right. Would I be wrong in saying that the environmentalist movement is the red movement masquerading as the green movement?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's a little far-fetched there, but, you know, most of the things you say are pretty far-fetched.
I know. Well, I'm telling you right now that the green movement is the red movement.
Yeah, well, you could look at it that way, but, I mean, what they need to do in order to regulate the environment is essentially to increase government control over the economy and over the country. So, yeah, you could make that. It's not that much of a stretch, no.
Okay. Christy, would you agree with me?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, look, these myths, we've talked about this, and you know this. These myths have been debunked numerous times. They don't care about the truth. Moreover, I mean, we've seen gas prices fall exponentially here in the last, I don't know, is it in 2015?
Since 2008, the gas prices have plummeted.
Okay, and I mean that's due to an increase in supply from hydraulic fracturing, certainly in North Dakota and the Dakotas, correct?
Yeah, it's partly that, and I think there's some other factors, but that's a lot of it is just oversupply.
Okay, yeah, which is a good thing. I don't know if there's to me, there's no such thing as an oversupply, but I mean, all the good that it does. I mean, you have homes back east. I know my folks, their largest expense is heating and oil. So buying oil twice a year to heat their home, I know. So I mean, it's really like, you know, higher gas prices harm those most vulnerable again. So I don't understand the left gets this, they're on this pedestal as helping those most in need, while in fact they generally harm them the most. And I don't understand how this myth remains. But speaking of myths, what's the most egregiously wrong, incorrect myth on fracturing that you hear most often, that you want to kind of debunk here and now, Christy?
The most frustrating one, and probably the most prevalent one, is that fracking contaminates the groundwater.
Okay.
That's really what people are the most worried about. Whenever they hear the word fracking, they just think they're going to be drinking chemicals.
So does fracturing? I mean, they claim that it's a bunch of chemicals. Is it possible for it to contaminate groundwater, or is it so far down in the shale that it would be impossible for that to seep into the groundwater?
I believe in my professional opinion that it's impossible for it to contaminate groundwater. Certainly there are ways for an oil and gas well to contaminate an aquifer, but fracking is not one of those ways.
Okay.
Usually we're fracking about like a mile below the Earth's surface, and aquifers are at the deepest maybe 1,000 feet. So we probably have at least like 4,000 to 6,000 feet in between our frack and the aquifer.
Okay.
So there's no way for the small amount of chemicals in the frack to migrate up through a mile of solid rock to contaminate the aquifer. It's just not possible.
Okay, so that's basically out of the question. I mean, and now let me ask you, can somebody who's fracturing, be, I don't know, complacent and accidentally, I guess accidents can happen in anything, but can they become complacent and screw it up, or who do they work with in order to ensure that they're not contaminating groundwater? Do they do prior research? Is there regulations? How does that work?
Yeah. How we design our wells, like we'll design our wells so there's metal casing in the well, and there's a safety factor and so there's a burst pressure on that casing, so you can go up to a certain pressure and you're not going to explode the casing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we design our fracks obviously to pump at lower pressures than that burst pressure. That's really the main thing, because the biggest risk is just like bursting in a hole in the casing and then pumping water into an aquifer. So that's really the greatest risk. But you'd have to be kind of extremely you'd have to be an idiot to pump a frack at a higher pressure than what your casing can withstand if you're an engineer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You often hear that there hasn't been enough studies done on fracking, that it's new technology. We don't know what the externalities of fracking can be. Is there any truth to that as well?
Yeah, we have tons and tons of information on fracking. I think we have way more data than we can even use. So I don't really understand where that opinion comes from, that we just don't have enough information and we don't know if it's safe or not. But we've been fracking for 68 years in the United States.
Right.
And engineers have been studying it since that time. And so we have computer models, and they've done actual tests at the surface with modeling fracks where they pump a frack into rock and then they mine it back, they dig back, and they actually look at what happened when they pumped that frack into the rock. And we have ways of tracking where the frack goes while we're pumping the frack. So it's a super high technology operation.
Right.
So I'm not sure why people think we just don't have any information or we don't know what's happening below the surface, because we really do have a good idea.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. Fracking, when it first began, it started a while ago, 60 plus years ago. And the costs were too high to extract the oil from shale at the time, and then through technological advances, I can't think of the phrase right now, but it became cost effective to do so, that they could make money on doing it through technological advances. So that's where a lot of people get this idea that it's a new technology.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
And what's maybe more new is the horizontal fracturing technology. We kind of perfected that in the Bakken Shale, and before that we weren't really, we didn't quite have it down where we could economically get that gas out of that shale. But so the horizontal fracturing is kind of more prevalent than it used to be, because I would say that maybe that's new, but yeah, you're right. We've been doing it for 65 years, and it's kind of a miracle that we can get oil and gas out of that shale, because it's back in 50 years ago they thought it would never be possible, and fracking's opened all of these different reserves in shale formations now, and that's why the U.S. is producing so much more oil than we used to.
Right. Has fracking ever contaminated groundwater?
There's actually never been a case where they've linked fracking to groundwater contamination ever.
Okay.
You won't find it.
So
yeah,
the
you just
claims
can't find it.
So the claims that this is going to cause cancer, I mean, how could it cause cancer if it's not going to seep into the groundwater, correct?
Right. It really, those claims are just completely ludicrous, and they're just meant to, make people afraid, which I think they've been successful with that.
Right. Can you give me some background on the chemicals that everybody's so concerned about, that they pump into the shale and we're all going to die, and birds are going to die? What kind of chemicals are you using? Are you using arsenic, or what is this?
We use some chemicals. Like, obviously, some of the chemicals we used, if you, swallowed them, you would die. But, I mean, that's true of, like, half the chemicals that you have under your kitchen sink as well.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, don't eat the chemicals, but we use...
Grant, do you hear that? Stop eating the chemicals under your kitchen sink. Go ahead. Sorry.
According to Gasland, we're pumping 5,000 chemicals in every frac job. But I went through one of my old frac reports, and I counted 10 chemicals that we used. And usually in a frac, like, you use the same kind of chemicals over and over, and even if they have different names or they have like different trade names from the different companies. But some of the stuff that we use, like, one of the bigger components is a guar gum, which is the stuff they use in like ice cream. It's edible, so it's not hazardous. And that makes the fluid gel, because we pump like a gel and it suspends the sand.
So can fracking make people unhealthy via guar gum by, I don't know, like as ice cream causes obesity, can fracking also cause obesity?
I think that we could probably make that link. That's pretty smart.
It makes people fat, basically, and it's not
fracking makes you fat.
Yeah,
it's another way that it kills you.
So there's another. We came up with another problem with fracking.
That's why Kevin's hair is gray.
Right, and it looks like that you're. I mean, what are some other? I'm sorry. Can you give me some other chemicals that are used so I can poke fun at the haters?
We use a surfactant, which is like a surface tension breaker. So it basically like prevents our fluid from making an emulsion, like mixing together. So it's like dish soap is a surfactant. You know how it breaks the grease in the water?
Oh, okay. So we may have unbearably clean dishes because of fracking.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, that's bad because it'll kill a lot of bacteria, and then we'll become immune. Like we won't be exposed.
Then we'll get sick all the time.
Right. Then we're all going to get sick.
Yeah.
We're going to be obese. And
man, it's worse than I thought it was.
Does fracturing shift tectonic plates and cause earthquakes?
No.
Sure?
A lot of people like to talk about the earthquakes in Oklahoma, and that is actually, they're still not totally sure what's going on in Oklahoma, but it's not linked to fracking. It's actually linked to water disposal wells, where they're pumping like thousands of barrels a day into thousands of wells in this area where there's already existing faults. So it's not actually related to fracking at all, but I mean, if you go on the internet and Google it, it'll come up with a bunch of fracking links.
Right.
So that's another myth. But no, in California, they've never linked a frac job to an earthquake. And I think in the history of time, like maybe there's been one frac job that they thought might have triggered like a 3.0 event, which is really not even everyone could feel that.
Now, part of the green movement, and I'm going to get the guys in on this, part of the green movement is there's a lot of people, this turns into a money-making industry to perpetuate these myths. Lobbyist groups, get hefty donations from people that actually believe this crap, and then they take it, and they use it as salaries, and they lobby politicians. Look at New York State; they won't legalize fracturing. They have plenty of natural gas in upstate New York. It's killing their economy, in upstate specifically. And then you have just next door Pennsylvania, which is gangbusters on fracturing. So I mean, it turns into an industry worth money to perpetuate these myths. Like, if you look at climate change in the same regards, they're never going. Let's say climate change, they can't link it to CO2, which I haven't seen any conclusive evidence. They'll never come out and say, "Oh, geez, we were wrong." I've never heard them come out and say our models were incorrect. It's this billion-dollar industry, and if they come out and say we're wrong, the money dries up. Am I off here on that assessment? Is it the same with fracturing? Christy?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
What is your question exactly?
Do you notice it being a money-making industry, the people to perpetuate these myths? And
I think that in order to justify their existence, like, they have to just keep going further and further with their agenda.
Right.
So, and I don't even think that it's an anti-fracking agenda as much as it's an anti-drilling agenda. Like, I mean, by shutting down fracking, they're effectively shutting down drilling in a lot of areas, and I think they know that.
Right. And one last question. Why do you think it's so hard for people to accept the truth to get out there? I'm lost on that. I mean, we put a link up on Unbiased America to our show about fracking, and people are still saying it lights your water out of your faucet will light on fire. And I mean, they're saying it as if it's empirically true. Why can't they are they not looking hard enough, or is it just they accept what they hear via mass media? Do you know?
Part of the problem is that Gasland was apparently a very convincing documentary, and it got people fired up. And I think there's a lot of weird guilt that people have, they think they're ruining the earth, so it's not cool to be pro oil, or it's not cool to be pro fracking.
Right.
I don't know. I just think there's a lot of people have a lot of guilt that was brought on by the environmentalist movement.
Right.
And so it makes them almost afraid to, I don't know, afraid to be pro oil person.
Right. Guys, do any of you guys have any questions on fracturing? Do you want to ask Christy?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I don't know much about fracturing and it's technical terms. I can talk about environmental economics all day. But I just have one question. Have there ever been any lawsuits waged against fracking companies recently? And if so, what were they about, and what was the outcome that you know of?
The only one I'm thinking of right now is there's been a couple lawsuits, I think, with the big service companies like Halliburton and BJ Services and Baker. Those are big frac companies, where the states have tried to pass laws where they require these companies to disclose their chemical formulas for their fracking chemicals, and that has become an issue because it's a trade secret and they're patented technologies. And so I know there's been some lawsuits about that, the states want them to basically give away their patented technology, the formulas for the public to look at, and you can see the problem with that. But as far as anything else, there's, I don't know of any lawsuits related to actually contaminating groundwater or anything like that with the fracking companies.
Because I wasn't sure if there was people attempting to sue different fracking companies or whether they thought they got contaminated or not, regardless, because I know that in economics the threat of a lawsuit is certainly a cost that people consider when they're developing new technologies, and it really encourages people to develop new technologies to do things safer and more efficiently. Mm-hmm. And I think what we saw in the Deep Horizon spill, which mm-hmm. really catapulted this whole anti-oil, anti-drilling thing, was, and it was never talked about, was that the federal government long ago capped the liability insurance on deepwater drilling. So basically it was, the insurance company said, we won't insure you, the risk is infinite. And then they said, all right, well, we'll just cap it at $25 million. Oh, well, then now we can drill all we want. So there was no investment in how can we make this safer, or how can we put more resources in this to make it safer. And I wasn't sure if that had actually happened in fracking or not, but thank you.
Yeah, I know that. Oh, sorry.
No, you go. I'm sorry.
Okay. I know that there's been cases where people have complained about their water being contaminated. I don't know if they've led to lawsuits, but I know there's been cases where they've tested water, and like I said, I don't think they've ever actually been able to connect a frac to someone's water well being contaminated.
Okay, Matty, you have a question?
Yeah, I was actually planning on asking about Oklahoma, but you answered that earlier. So I just Googled fracking problems to see if there's anything other myths you could attack, and the first thing that came up was fracking links to low birth weight babies. Is that insane?
Wow, that's a new one. I've never heard of that one before.
Okay, so I'm guessing.
I would love to hear that correlation. Yeah.
Kevin, I know you have a question.
I do. What exactly is your job? What do you do, and how much do you, or say, the companies that engage in fracking, how much do they deal with the federal government regulations and so forth? Is it something that takes your business a considerable amount of time to conform to, or is it something that you believe is necessary? Is it over-regulated?
Yeah, so my job, I actually design frac jobs and completions of wells. So frac is just a completion of a well. Like we drill the well and then we have the completion phase, which is where we might frac the well. And then after that's the production phase. So I do all three of those because this is a small company. So that's what I do. So I've actually designed frac jobs and then I usually supervise them on site as well. So I've been pretty close to it. And then what was the second part of your question?
How much do regulations
Oh, yeah.
play in terms of your everyday job?
Yeah, so regulations are a huge part of our job. In California, they just passed a new Senate bill that's regulating fracking. So basically, before this bill was passed, we could just go out there and frack a well without reporting it to the state. Now we've been trying to get a permit for over a year and a half for a frack, and we haven't been able to get one because of these new regulations. So they've put like a huge burden on the operators, and basically the state can ask for information forever, and they can ask for like as much information as they want. They can make you do like hydrogeologic studies. They're going to make us drill monitoring wells to test aquifer waters before we do a frack. So it's become extremely expensive. We're estimating that it could double or triple the cost of a frack now with these new regulations. So we're super heavily regulated now in California. The other states I've worked in were not as highly regulated as California, but they were effectively regulated. So I'd say there was less of a burden and more effective regulation in some of the other states that I've worked in. But altogether, yeah, the regulators are really on top of the fracking, and I would say it ends up costing quite a bit of money because usually you either have to test water wells or at the minimum you have to submit paperwork and a lot of evidence of what you did during the frack.
Do you feel like this is, you might know the answer to this, but do you feel like this is a political way of stemming the tide of fracking, by using the bureaucracy to essentially increase the cost and the time involved, that this is a backdoor way of shutting down what a lot of environmentalists don't want to see happen, which is fracking increasing the production of oil and natural gas and so forth?
Yeah, especially here in California, I feel that these regulations are going to be extremely burdensome, and it's going to push companies away from fracking, which I think is what they wanted to do. So, you know, it's like effectively a ban on fracking by just like super over-regulating it to the point that it's no longer economic. Because California is a little different in that we don't have to frack our wells all the time. Some states you have to frack the wells or else they're not economic. So if you ban fracking, you're banning drilling. Here, you can get away with not fracking. However, you know, we should be able to do that if we want to.
I have a question, I guess, more about the industry in general rather than just fracking, pro and con. How are you guys affected by, you know, the decline in oil prices recently? I think it's pretty well established now that OPEC was purposely allowing supply or not stemming supply in an effort to crush U.S. producers. And I know, you know, giants like Chevron actually have insurance contracts where if oil prices fall, you know, for a certain percentage of time, they'll get a payout to compensate for that. So what ways do you guys hedge against, I guess, price falls like that, and how has it affected you?
Sometimes we have hedges in place, so we'll hedge an oil price, like especially when the oil price was high, we would just put hedges in place. So that guarantees you like 6 months of a certain price for whatever production you're getting. However, like in this economy that we're in right now, like a lot of people's hedges are running out as well as ours, and so we're basically making less than 50% of the profits that we were making before because we have fixed costs. So oil price dropped by over 50%. We have fixed costs, so our profits are actually under 50% of what they were. So we've significantly cut back on our activity and our drilling. And that also makes the regulations even more burdensome. Like it makes them even more ridiculous when the regulators are trying to regulate more and more and more, and then the oil price is dropping.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, also, with oil prices too, that you see with wheat prices, you have private speculators, and at this point, speculators are going to buy up tons of barrels of oil and hold on to it until the prices rise again, which also kind of creates an increase in the gas prices. They're probably a little bit more than they should be because of speculation, which actually is a good thing in a sense that people will more judiciously use oil in case there's like a future dearth in oil. So it makes us actually conserve resources at a time when probably people would just blithely throw oil away or use it, less judiciously. So I think there's market mechanisms that like prevent certain things like that. Like go ahead.
I don't know if I'd call it speculation. I think it's just realizing that it's undervalued and
yes,
yeah.
That's what speculators do. They're like, oh my God, look how low this is. I'm going to buy up a ton of barrels. I know eventually maybe they had to have information we don't know, and then maybe they know that there's going to be eventually a dearth in supply, so they buy up a ton of it, and then that makes people maybe the prices will go up. People don't use oil as much, so that helps with the future dearth, and then they just go ahead.
There's been something, I think it's either 6 or 8 times since the 80s where the price of oil has fallen by half. And if you actually look at like the price patterns versus the crash that we're seeing now, it's almost identical, each crash and rise. So it's pretty predictable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this one though, this is new because I think now we're the biggest supplier of oil in the world. Is that right, Christine?
I believe that's true, yeah.
I think fracturing kind of changed the game here at this point. We have access to trillions of barrels of oil in this country alone. I read an article that we have far more than Russia in the Middle East. Is that true?
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah, I think it's really significant because, like Saudi Arabia is just not as in control as they used to be. Like we just have a lot more of the market share now, and so we have a lot more of the power, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I don't know. It's all really interesting. I mean, the great part is that, to see the market work, to see capitalism work in lowering oil prices, everybody, I want to vote for this president to lower oil prices or that president. And what's lowered oil prices over the past however many years was capitalism. People seeing companies like yours seeing these high prices and then going out and trying to get more oil in order to make profit seeking, which brought down prices and helps everybody else. Mm-hmm. I mean, the very thing that these environmentalists despise has helped the most people. I mean, when oil prices drop, I don't have a ton of money. It helps me to save money when I put gas in my car to put food in my mouth. Politicians don't care about me. If I have to pay $80 to fill up my gas tank as opposed to $60 or $55, $25 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could buy 15, 20 hamburgers with that thing.
So there was a report out today.
Go ahead, Karen.
Because there was a report out today that said that the U.S. was expecting the decrease in gas prices to basically fund a lot of new consumer spending, and they would think that would offset the loss of jobs that the lower gas prices and the lower oil prices were causing. And they're not happy because apparently what the consumer has done is instead of spending that, they've saved the money.
Horrifying.
Yeah,
which is a good thing.
And Bernie Sanders is just bitching about how Americans don't have money in savings.
Yeah. Well, Grant, the reason so many children are starving in this country is because we have 20 deodorant choices. If you listen to Bernie Sanders, so.
No, but I mean, look, they say they're not spending it. Consumer spending always stays relatively the same. The thing is that the increase in savings will bring down. If we had a natural market economy, it would bring down interest rates. Banks loan this money out. This would increase investment in other industries, so that capital that was previously going to oil prices now can go into new industries to create new wealth and increase production. Go ahead, Matt.
All saved money is money spent later. So
that's right. Right. It increases. Right. It will increase it increases the supply of money, therefore lowering interest rates. But I mean, we don't have a real natural market economy for interest rates. Obviously, I don't think they've been raised. And they're still near zero, and when was the crash? 2008. This is unbelievable.
I mean, they've been artificially low since 9/11. It's just that they were cut down to zero in 08, 09, and they're still there. So
yeah, well, they
15 years of this.
They were low since they were really low in 2001. It was the spike when they finally raised interest rates. I think in 2005 or 2006. It might have been 2004. And that's kind of like when the housing market started to take a dump because these interest, with the teaser rates and so on, these people couldn't make payments. And that was the end of the housing bubble. Kevin, I think you did a piece, right, on interest rates and how they've been low for years. Was that you?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the repercussions of having extremely low interest rates, and what that does, let's say if there is let's say but we have another crash akin to the 1937 crash during the Depression. Is there anything the government could do to mitigate the problems created by another crash like that?
Yeah, well, the government doesn't want to. They want people to continue to borrow. I mean, the government, they're on an election cycle. They want to get reelected, so they want the economy to keep going. They'll airdrop money onto people. They don't care. So they're going to keep rates low and let the next administration worry about it, and that's what's going on. And in the process, they create these bubbles. People get this money. That shouldn't have the money. They get these ridiculous low rates. They buy, in one case, they bought houses, that were too big for themselves, or they're getting student loans at, very low rates and so forth. And what it does is it creates bubbles. And when
hold on, Kevin. Let me ask you, with those bubbles, is that like a misallocation of resources because they're perverting the price structure in essence? Is that not true?
Exactly. Like you said, if there was a if interest rates were set by the market, you would have prices be more would be set more accurately. Instead, you've got people, a group of 6 or 10 people sitting there saying, okay, now's the time to increase rates, now's the time to decrease rates, and they continue to be at zero. And the big problem becomes now, what happens if we get into a recession right now? Usually, they would lower rates. Now they're at zero, they can't. And they can't really take out any more debt. We have too much debt. What's going to happen? We're going to end up becoming Japan. We're going to end up basically paying for our government services by printing money. Yep. So, by taking charge of rates, you can make the economy look a little bit better in the near term, but you're really creating bubbles and you're screwing up life in the long run.
Right.
Speaking of Japan, a lot of my liberal friends will look at Japan and point out that their debt to GDP is like 250% or something, and say that that's sustainable. I guess ignoring the fact that something like 40 to 50% of their budget goes towards interest payments on debt.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah.
We borrow to pay our debt. God, this is outrageous. We had a professor on last week, Christy, and we talked a lot about academia and like the I don't know, more so in the humanities. She's an economist, so it's somewhat of the soft sciences per se. So she's in like the political science department. You were more in the hard sciences department at Texas A&M. Was there a liberal bias in the humanities department at Texas A&M, or is it this conservative, this conservative right-wing extremist campus, as most people would think it is?
It actually kind of is like that. I don't know. I graduated in 2004, so it's been 11 years. But
I'm sure it hasn't changed.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just a super conservative school. Like I never experienced any like liberal bias in any of my classes in all 4 years. But I was in engineering, so
right.
I mean maybe that's different.
In engineering, it's really hard to. I mean, not many opportunities to be biased, but
you can't make calculus liberal.
I'm sorry?
You can't make calculus liberal.
No, I know.
You really can't. It's really hard to do that.
So, I mean, that's why economics departments tend to be more conservative than liberal. Obviously, you can't say that.
Make reality liberal.
Right. But did you, like in the humanities department, did you ever come in contact with that department, the political science department? Did you ever hear any students complain or know any teachers that were sort of leftist? I just kind of want to get a baseline for what even colleges are like in Texas.
I really didn't hear many stories like that. I had a couple friends that were in liberal arts education or journalism, and I didn't hear a lot about that. So I lived in Colorado before I moved out here to California, and there was a small liberal arts college called Fort Lewis College out there, and I heard just like infinite numbers of stories of professors like kind of pushing that agenda in their classes. So I mean, I think it was kind of like a night and day difference from what I saw between the two schools. But yeah, I really never heard any stories or anything like that. I mean, like I said, it may have changed a bit. Like there may be a little bit more of that on campus at A&M now. But yeah, when I was there, it just really wasn't very common.
And when you were there and you were learning about fracking, and I mean, you are petroleum in general. I mean, did you hear a lot of these myths, promulgated at that time? And did it? No.
Yeah, at that time, nothing. Like, the general public had never heard of fracking at
Right.
all at that point in time. We didn't think anything of it. It was just this totally normal thing. We had a whole class on it. And, like, we're like, well, we're engineers and we're learning this technique and it's highly technical and the general public doesn't know about it. And that was totally normal. Like, we didn't have to respond to anything.
Right. So what was your
In the
first thought?
media.
Like, what was your first thought when you saw primarily the left attack fracking? Was it mind-boggling? Like, what are they talking about?
Yeah, it was mind-boggling because, because I'd never heard that before. It's something totally new, and
And you studied this in college, correct? You studied this.
yeah,
in academia.
we had to get a degree in order to even design these frac jobs, and then to have the general public attacking you as if you don't know what you're doing is kind of insulting to me.
No,
So,
I mean that's interesting. I don't understand that. So let's say you're at a bar and someone's trying to tell you they have no idea anything about fracturing, but they're going to tell you when you're a petroleum engineer, and they're trying to tell you about what hydraulic fracturing is. That to me is incredible.
It happens all the time. I mean, there was a lady the other day that I was talking to, and I was explaining to her what we're doing, and she was like, "Yeah, but I really feel like it's contaminating the groundwater. I just feel like it is." So that's what she
Always
said.
the feelings. Always the feelings. They always matter.
we see this a lot too, especially Kevin and I. When we do, I mean, I've been furious the last few weeks about minimum wage. Okay, and it's and Kevin has his economics degree. I mean, it's hard to refute the modeling on minimum wage. It's hard to refute the empirical evidence on minimum wage.
Yeah.
But yet people hold on to it no matter how many times you try to show them, you debunk studies, and they're trying to tell me, and I mean, I'm in economics, this is what I do. I think, I don't know, Kevin, and somebody said to me that they think that somehow minimum wage shifts the demand curve out. And I think that was kind of I think that people do think that it somehow it increases demand for labor. I don't know. I think that's what they really think it does, but in reality, all it does is shift the demand curve out for government largesse is really what it does. So I just want to get. I don't want to get a hold on this mentality that these people, they hear these things and believe them, then do a Google search to confirm their biases. I mean, and I could find I mean, we got into this debate with one fella, and he'll pull up studies, these nonsensical studies. I'll read it, I don't even want to get into that, but
it's a good point, and you know what? You're going to probably see this too in the fracking industry, which is if somebody wants to conclude something, first they'll just do it through their feelings,
right?
Then they'll do it through bogus science, but eventually somebody's going to do a peer-reviewed, and probably they already have in the fracking industry, some sort of peer-reviewed study that says something that that the opponents can latch onto, and that becomes something that you'll start seeing everywhere. And people will say, "Look at this study," and Being Liberal or the Huffington Post or something else will start writing papers claiming that it's been verified that fracking is leading to lower birth weight babies and so forth. And all it takes is a couple of studies, and that pretty soon now the science is divided. Now people start saying, well, it's not conclusive. The science is divided. So it's just going to take a couple of people who find a pretty a bad study to turn this into basically a shouting fest, which it's becoming.
Now, I know Grant and Matt have written on minimum wage. I get into this every show because you know what? This pisses me off.
So I fucking hate, excuse my French, I hate that law so much.
I just can't figure out how no matter, I mean, it's like ad infinitum I argue this. I'll show graphs, I'll get the mathematics, I'll put it on from YouTube, and the guy will show you on the graph, this is price floors, this is what happens. Nobel laureate economists will back it up. No, doesn't matter.
Well, I think the English majors are right on this one.
You think the English majors are right?
Yeah.
I mean, you've done work on it. Have you looked at some of this contrary studies, Matty?
Yes. So, I mean, the most literally, you'll see this in every single minimum wage debate from the pro-minimum wage side. There was actually some kid in my economics class last semester who's going to give a presentation pro-minimum wage, and I said to the kid next to me, the only study he's going to cite is from two guys named Card and Kruger, and lo and behold, he cited Card and Kruger.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to give some background on the study, it's like a 20-year-old study. He compared, I guess New Jersey raised the minimum wage and PA didn't. and they argued that there's no increase in unemployment in New Jersey versus PA, although one, I mean, it was all done by phone. He just called businesses before and after to survey them. Not that reliable. Second of all, if a business goes under as a result of the minimum wage law, you can't call them back and see how it went. So if you call them back, you're only seeing businesses who weren't affected by it.
Right, you're seeing. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Within a year of being published, and it was shown to be complete nonsense, and yet 20 years later, it's still cited.
Right. So, and I mean, I've made this argument many times. It's the what is seen and what is unseen. Yeah. Oh, yeah, minimum wage helps some people. Absolutely. It raises their wage. And they're going to say, yeah, this is the best law ever, and people are going to, I want that too. But what you don't see are the people that don't get hired, that can't get $15 an hour, and they don't know.
Have you heard the argument that, like, we should raise minimum wage so businesses don't, or so government doesn't spend as much on welfare?
Oh, yeah, I've heard that many times.
What about the people who are unemployed now? What about them? They're not going to be getting welfare?
Like I said, it doesn't shift the demand curve out for labor. It shifts the demand curve out for government largesse.
When San Francisco raised their minimum wage, a lot of people were going crazy, citing this California Berkeley study. And so I did a piece on it. Oh, okay, I know. So I looked at the study. I was like, oh, you know what? Like, all right, I'll read this study. I'll be really indifferent to it. I know it's gonna be super liberal. Let's see what they have to say. All they have said, all they addressed the entire time was minimum wage does not have an effect on employment. Right. And all I'm thinking is, that's not good. Employment's supposed to grow. It's not supposed to just stay the same the whole time. Right. And they didn't say, I looked at the whole thing. They didn't even say the word unemployment. The word unemployment was not in the entire study at all. Right. All I'm thinking to myself is, so basically, you instituted a new minimum wage, nothing changed, and you proclaim that it's some sort of major success.
Right.
What?
There's a new one that I've heard, a new argument from the people that like the minimum wage, which is, okay, the people who are opposed to minimum wage, we point out that it's not overall employment, it's employment in certain sectors that's affected, including teen unemployment, young unskilled workers, and so forth. And so the argument back is, well, that's good. Teens shouldn't be working. Young people shouldn't be working. The minimum wage is having a desirable effect because it's putting these people out of work, and now they have to go to school, which is what they should be doing. I seriously, and now
no. There's actually evidence that a higher minimum wage discourages education among workers. So it's not true. Yeah, I mean, the argument's retarded.
Yeah, if they could get a job. Yeah, I mean, you did a really great write-up on this, Kevin, actually, for once, because all your other stuff is absolute and utter crap. You did one on the government laws and how it harms those most vulnerable, which I talk about a lot on the show, and you did a good job on that. I don't know, I think they posted pretty well, but I mean, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, these people are just they're just hammered by these laws, rules, regulations. I think the worst thing to me about minimum wage is it prices people out of the market. It makes it illegal to hire somebody that cannot earn $15 an hour, let's say use $15, and then they cannot build any skills in the marketplace. They're dependent. If they can't get a job, how can they accumulate any sort of human capital to make it in the future? Now we have unproductive labor that just sits there. I mean, it doesn't add to production. I don't understand.
Who does it help? Who does it help? Well, no, but it helps competitively. It helps the people that can afford a college education. It helps people who have connections. It helps people who can get into the job market in any other
by restricting labor. Right.
And the people that can't, the people who have a poor education or don't have money, don't have connections, what they normally would rely on, going back to the Irish immigration, people came over here with no skills. All they had to do was get an unskilled job and work their way up. Those people don't exist in America anymore. They can't get a job because of these laws. And it's the people that already have money and can get an education and so forth that are benefiting. They'll go to college, they'll get their education, they'll get their foot in the door.
So I draw the correlation to fracturing because, look, there were high oil prices. Oil companies went out and said we're going to get fracturing. There's this, the markets, this price signals. They're sending signals that we can make large profits right now in oil. It increased the supply of oil, which dropped prices and helps those most vulnerable. And who is out there trying to stop this from happening? The left again. I mean, here they are setting minimum wage laws. They're trying to hamper, oil research and oil discovery, which helps poor people. Their public education is crap. I mean, they're doing this in so many different ways. I bring this up on every show, but I think they mean to do this.
Can I say something really quick?
Go.
I saw this the other day, and I saw it today, and when I heard that we were doing fracturing, knew I had to bring it up. So I saw a meme the other day that basically said, well, it was one of those what America doesn't do, and it said
fuck, it still exists.
Yeah, it said that
I read another
Norway
article,
and
guys.
Denmark. It said Norway and Denmark tax their oil companies at like 70%.
I saw that.
90% or something, yeah.
And all I'm thinking is, and I'm like, okay, so I just like Google like, what's the price of gas? And
9 a gallon.
Yeah, it's like $9 a gallon.
I actually.
And then I go on the same Facebook page. I go back like a few pictures, and here they are praising President Obama for like bringing down oil, for bringing down gas prices. I'm like, what? What are you doing?
Grant, I'm actually serious. That's how I met Carl and got him on the show. Was I wrote an article about all those memes he did.
The Opposite of America article. I saw that one.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people are. I mean, I guess I do, but the left in particular. Oh, look at Norway. Look at Denmark. Why the hell would we want to be like Norway and Denmark?
Because I want to work 8 months a year to pay my taxes. I guess I don't know.
The United States of America, quite possibly the greatest country economically speaking,
but we don't get
in
free
history,
healthcare.
should be more like Norway. That's a great idea.
People who invented fracking should be more like Norway.
Yeah, we should. Unbelievable. The highest per capita GDP in the world. Let's be more like Denmark. I literally think they want to halt capitalism. I mean, I've heard some leftists use the term degrowth. Literally use the term degrowth.
Yeah.
Meaning that we have to degrow, lower production. You know what I mean? I don't understand. I think to the point of fracturing too, and to a lot what we're talking about with degrowth is there's this profound misunderstanding of where wealth comes from. Would you agree, Kevin, on that? I don't think they know where wealth comes. Where people.
Yeah, is it a fixed pie? A lot of people are like, well, that guy's got too much. He must be taking it from poor people.
Yeah, French doors.
It doesn't work like that. The way you get people out of poverty is by creating wealth,
not
by redistributing it. It's a finite. If you're going to treat it like a finite resource, and you're not going to create more of it, then you're going to end up with a lot more poor people, frankly, or a lot of people that are slightly better off. Instead of, if you expand wealth, you're going to get people out of poverty. That's what capitalism did. If you look at a chart of when capitalism began, back in the late 1700s, you look at GDP in the world, it basically does a hockey stick straight up.
Right.
That wasn't from redistributing wealth. That was from creating wealth.
Right. I mean, you hear a lot of this trickle-down distribution. Wealth isn't distributed, and wealth does not trickle down. Wealth is created by wealth creators. And the fracking industry, petroleum industry specifically, is a wealth-creating industry. You know what I mean?
I have a question. I have a question for Christy.
Go.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Christy. So you're a female in the engineering field. I work for a machine shop that I do production management for a machine shop, and we have a lot of mechanical engineers, and it's all men.
Yeah.
And then I also see a lot of feminists saying, "Oh, we need more women in the engineering field," and then they go and get a gender studies degree. Do you think that engineering is male driven because of the innate characteristics of the genders? Or do you think that women are, quote unquote, taught by society to do one thing or the other? Like, how do you see being a woman in the engineering field?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just driven by kind of like natural, innate desires. I mean, I just think a lot of girls aren't interested in math and science. There may be some sort of societal reasoning behind that, historically men go into engineering, so maybe that's part of it, but in my class, a third of my class was female engineers in petroleum, whereas the mechanical department, there was 3 girls out of 1,000. So I think it's the type of engineering matters a lot too, because petroleum is a little less technical, a little bit more practical, so I think that appeals more to the female brain. So I think if you look at different types of engineering, you'll see a lot of difference in how many females go into it. But yeah, I actually think that I saw an article the other day. This woman in New York said that the fracking industry only provides jobs for women as prostitutes and maids. So I mean, I found that highly insulting.
No, that's okay, because the left isn't misogynistic. and feminists
No.
aren't. They just want to
You know what-
dictate to women how they should live their lives. and
You
that's-
only got your job because they pay you less, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
You know what's quite
yeah.
interesting, guys? I saw some memes. Actually, it was today. It was like a quote from Bill Nye. It was like, he said 50% of the population is women. Therefore, 50% of scientists should be women. No one ever says like, 50% of garbage men should be women, or 50% of ditch diggers should be women.
Right.
It's only desired fields that people say
Right.
this shit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
50% of ditch diggers. No, 90% of females are nurses. I think there should be more men representation.
Right.
Actually, speaking of that, Will, there was some feminist claims recently that in nursing, like male nurses make $5,000 a year more than female nurses.
Mhm.
So I looked into it, and something like 90% of night shifts at hospitals
Are men.
are done by male nurses, and they pay something like $3 an hour extra on average, and that explains the entire gap.
Well, there's this profound reasoning for this. It's that this very sexist, misogynistic reasoning that women have babies, and
Yes.
they make different choices.
Well, that's because the
Oh my
patriarchy
God.
rules, if you will.
And if you would just change your gender.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is all right. Let's get our resident feminist, Kevin, in on this one. Go ahead, Kevin. What do you want? What do you want to say?
I was going to change the subject for a second back to the environment because I just did an article or a post for Unbiased America talking about something that happened quietly. Well, quietly if you're not paying attention. The EPA just wrote a new rule, a new regulation that it just announced, and in 60 days is going to come into effect. And I think Christie, I don't know if this will affect Christie, but it has the potential to affect everybody big time. It's called the Waters of the U.S. rule, and what it does is the Clean Water Act, which was already in place, didn't provide a proper.
No.
It didn't provide a specific explanation or definition for what is the actual covered by the Clean Water Act. What this rule does is it sets out the definition. And the definition it sets out is basically going to expand federal regulation and federal jurisdiction over almost every waterway in the United States, because it says in order to be under the jurisdiction of the federal government, all it has to do is demonstrate that a body of water, and it could be a puddle, I mean literally it could be anything, has a nexus or a connection to a navigable body of water. And of course we all know water flows downhill and eventually
But Kevin,
ends up in a river.
hasn't the EPA's been regulating that for some time now?
This regulates more. This expands the amount that's under regulation. And it started out with a test saying, okay, does this body of water qualify? Now it's saying all bodies of water that were previously subject to this test qualify under the law. And now anything, even if it's non-navigable, as long as they can prove a connection to a body of water that is navigable, is now under this law. And it has 60 days, this new rule, to apply. And potentially, almost every part of America that has water is now going to be subject to the Clean Water Act. And I would think, Christie, you don't agree with this, Will?
No,
Well,
this is like devastating for a lot of industries, including ours.
No, this is what it does. It regulates private people, what they do on their own private property, and that's businesses included. I read a story under the Clean Water Act already. I forgot what state it was. A guy literally dug a ditch in his yard and was putting sand somewhere in his own yard, and a regulator came up and said that's too close to a navigable waterway, the sand displacement, and ticketed the guy. And he's 3 miles or so from any sort of water. So, I mean, this is what the government's trying to do. They're centralizing all sorts of authority. What is the point of the state government? If this was so necessary, wouldn't the state have taken over those waterways with the individual states?
If you look at, I looked at one state, which is Indiana. The way the law was written before, and I'm quoting the numbers off the top of my head, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but 5% of all Indiana waters were subject to this Clean Water Act, basically federal jurisdiction. It's doubled that now to at least 10%. So you're getting basically a power grab, which is happening very quietly. Nobody's paying attention to this. and it's expanding federal jurisdiction to everywhere. And you got to think, if they don't want fracking to occur, they're going to say, okay, you're too close to some body of water that we've connected, we've established there's a nexus to a navigable body of water, and they're going to shut you down, or they're going to expose you, or they're going to make you force you to comply with their regulations. I mean, this is how they do it. Like you said before, Christy, it's a backdoor way of shutting down an undesirable operation such as fracking.
Yeah, I've had an EPA inspector standing on a location, and she was looking at like a tiny dry drainage. We were probably like 3 miles from a river, and she told me that little like tiny dry drainage is considered a navigable water of the U.S. because it leads into a river. So I mean, they've been thinking this way for many years, but now it's like actually going to be law, I guess.
Yeah, they're codifying. They're basically, now there's no doubt. Now they're saying by the law or by this regulation, there's no doubt. They don't even have to. There's no question. They can just throw you off of that land and say, that puddle is eventually going to drain into a river, and therefore you can't do anything here, or you have to comply to our regulations.
Like if you have a puddle of oil on your location, like they could tell you that you're violating the Clean Water Act because, you know, your oil could drain off into a river. I mean, you're right. Like a puddle to them is a navigable water now.
It's amazing that they call these things, this is the Clean Water Act. It does it does absolutely nothing to clean water. We got clean water through increase in production and capitalism. Government had nothing to do with clean water. They use these terms to I mean, literally centralize authority. I mean, they create politburos to control people. It's insanity, is what it is. And you know that law did not come from Congress. It came from the administrative state, literally a politburo, if I would call it that. And I think the the Supreme Court has ruled on the EPA making its own laws and says it cannot do that. And I know that you said the clean water they're doing this under the guise of the Clean Water Act because it wasn't specific. It wasn't specific enough. So Congress is partly to blame for this by delegating duties to the executive branch. Still in all, I think you'll see somebody was standing in federal court, and I think you'll see this get overturned. But how much damage will it do first?
Well,
you know what I mean?
It went to the Supreme Court once when they tried to clarify what they meant by what was under the jurisdiction of this law. And the Supreme Court rule is a weird ruling. It was 4 to 1. And in the ruling, basically, the one dissenting vote, which I believe was Justice Kennedy, he's the one who said that the water has to show some nexus to a body of water that's already under jurisdiction or it's navigable. And that's what they're now using. That's what the government's now using to create these new regulations, saying basically every body of water in America is under federal jurisdiction under this law.
And here's another thing: federal land. I mean, can you, Christy? Is it possible yet to? I mean, I know it wasn't before, but is it possible to frack on federal land?
Yeah, it is possible. I've done it before. I did it in Colorado.
Okay.
So. Yeah,
is most of the land
used to be possible. I haven't dealt with that in a few years, but
I think it's true that most fracking is done on private land, but
yeah, that is true. That is true. I think in the past, I don't know. I think since Obama was elected, like most of the new drilling has been all on private land because the federal agencies have become much more difficult to deal with.
Right. I mean, they're going to create basically barriers to entry in order to frack for political reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, man. It's not good. The power grabs by the federal government. These are the things too. That's great, Kevin, that you expose this because these are the things that get under the radar, and people are worried about. And again, I bring this up: marijuana and so on and so forth. We have an overreaching, lawless federal government that tries to take away our rights. Literally, how I move, what I do in my own home, what I do in my yard. If I dig a ditch, I'm a criminal. I mean, that to me, that's bad. It's bad news. Would you agree, Kevin?
Yeah, and I just want to make a distinction too that I don't think it matters what your ideology is. If somebody is using the powers of government to forward their agenda, their ideology, or whatever, be it marijuana, be it fracking, if somebody was giving the fracking industry an unfair advantage, that's just as bad as going after them and shutting them down. I think that's where the government fails us, is when it imposes its will and the vision of a few people in Washington on the entire marketplace.
Right.
And now we're in a situation where it's the left, for the most part, imposing their will onto people, and because of that, you've got things like fracking getting shut down or getting overregulated, and you've got this Clean Water Act that's taking over way too much authority,
Right.
and I just think you have to keep government out of the marketplace, and that's what's
Absolutely.
happening. It's not.
And I wanted to talk about, it's great you brought that up, I wanted to talk about market solutions to a lot of these problems. And specifically, Christy, oil companies, I mean, when they're fracking, is it within their best interest, or do they have any incentive to contaminate groundwater, what incentive do they have to do these things? I mean, that would be the worst thing for business possible.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Yeah.
zero.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, that.
I'm sorry, Christy. Matt, what were you saying? And then you can answer.
I just said zero to your question.
Right,
What
okay.
more?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Christy.
Yeah, basically, like a small frac job costs like $300,000 to $400,000. So, I mean, why would we want to spend that much money to pump our frac into an aquifer? Like, we wouldn't. So we have no incentive
Right.
at all to, like, if we were evil and we're trying to kill people. I mean, like, I don't know. That's what people think, but we have no incentive to waste our money like that.
And
Like, we have every single incentive is going to be to make that frac successful and to increase oil production and keep it in the zone that we wanted it in, and to do it safely. We have every incentive to do that because of economics.
Right, and also, don't you have, pecuniary incentives insofar as it relates to your insurance? I mean, what happens to insurance if you have if these things happen? I mean, right? Wouldn't
Yeah.
it?
We
Wouldn't your
certainly don't want any sort of insurance claims that would, increase our rates. Yeah, we don't want to hurt anyone, and we don't want to contaminate anything. Like, yeah, that would be.
So you
bad
already have regulations imposed on you by the market. The market has, without any government, has imposed regulations on the fracking industry.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so I just don't understand. I don't know. There's market solutions to these things, and nobody ever looks at them, and they think, oh, externalities, government has to take care of it. You know what I mean? Grant, would you agree with me on that? I mean, as regulating externalities?
Well, I would agree that government has a role in enforcing property rights, meaning that and I'm just being hypothetical here, but going back to what Christy and I were talking about earlier, that let's just say fracking did cause somebody some sort of damage or
Torts,
whatever it might be. Yeah, torts, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No,
in
torts.
that regard.
Keep
And
torts,
honestly,
absolutely.
I think our government falls very short in protecting and respecting property rights. There could be cases where if there's some sort of, like, I can't remember the case off the top of my head. I want to say it was Walmart, and they didn't clean up trash or they polluted a stream or something. So somebody took them to court, and the first thing the lawyer said was, "Well, we were within this EPA regulation, so you can't sue us." And they're like, "Oh, okay, well then, yeah, you're good, you're off the hook."
Yeah.
So it's just a complete disregard for property rights, and they call it regulation, but what they really mean is special favors for whoever's in the game.
That's weird, though. Within tort law, they should be able to sue if they can show damages.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. I saw it in a documentary, and I was like, wait a minute, that can't be right.
Yeah, I was going to say that. You have the insurance and you have tort law. I mean, generally that's what you have insurance for. I mean, a lot of the tort law is generally abused in the American system as opposed to the English system for a couple of reasons that I don't really need to get into. But I think that regulates the market far better than some bureaucrat that knows absolutely zero about fracking, nothing, and it's just really political posturing at that point. Go ahead, Grant. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask Christy one more question. These regulations that are being imposed on fracking in California, whether it's statewide or federal, do you see that as being so severe that it's essentially pushing out small firms and allowing for bigger firms to say, hey, we can absorb the extra costs and still be profitable, and because in my mind that would be a way for big firms being like, yes, let's have more regulations and let's push out the competition. Do you think that's a fair statement?
I don't know if big companies really think that way, but in effect, like, it is, in a lot of ways, it is doing that because, the new regulations in California require they're saying that they want us to drill 3 water monitoring wells for every frack job that we do. So companies like us that have isolated wells, like out in the middle of nowhere, like we'll have to drill 3 monitoring wells around that one well. Whereas like if you had a whole huge field like Chevron or one of the big operators has, like you could do you could do less wells per frack. Does that make sense? So like your incremental cost per frack job is a lot less for the regulations, like to comply with the regulations. So for us, like the incremental cost of the regulations is going to be super, super high, and it is going to hurt us, and it's going to affect, you know, what we do in California. So I think it's doing that. I don't know if the big companies are okay with that or if they want that, but it is doing that.
Yeah, I always hear liberals talking about they want to regulate this and that industry because of these evil big businesses, but when it comes down to it, it's the little guys that pay the cost. It's the little guys that get hurt the most, and then they wonder why why there's all these giants that are just, you know, competing in this like almost an oligopoly, and whether it's energy or, you know, whatever it might be.
And then you got to get the antitrust law out there and break them up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then it just snowballs. It just snowballs, and then they just say, "Oh, it must be capitalism's fault."
Right.
There's
Well, virtually
20 million pages to the Federal Register.
It's government. I mean, more government is the solution, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Kevin.
More government, more feelings, and fair wages.
feels and government
All the feelings.
and sloganeering and mantras. Those pass as a reason and logic. You know what I mean? And just repeat them. Don't think. Repeat. Repetition key. Kevin, do you have anything? Do you have any other questions or anything to add?
Just give me a second.
You crying a little bit?
I got the feels. Sorry.
You got the feels? You caught the feels?
I got the feels.
Oh, you're gonna start saying words like fair and diversity, living wages.
Not fair. I don't want to
Social
frack. No
justice.
more fracking.
Oh, God.
Underweight babies.
Underweight fracking is killing planets. It's moving.
Well, aren't we all obese anyway? So isn't that like healthy?
Guar gum's gonna make us fat because it's an ice cream. Matty, do you have any other questions to ask Christy?
Honestly, none I can think of.
Okay. Well, that was a good show.
That was very insightful, Christy. I didn't know anything about fracking.
Oh,
except
good.
that I love it because it's capitalism.
Yay!
Yeah, honestly, before the show, everything I knew about fracking was from everything I Googled 8 minutes before the show. So, yeah, I learned a lot.
Yeah, that was really good. That was a ton of information.
If you guys ever want any info, just let me know.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
If liberals hate it, I love it automatically. I don't even have to do research.
Yeah.
These guys are biased. Don't listen to them.
And just a reminder, follow Being Classically Liberal, The Analytical Conservative, Unbiased America, and The Modern Libertarian. Also, We Are Capitalists, and my personal page, Will Rickerdella. You can follow that one too. It's such a great page. It's probably better than all the other ones, except for The Analytical Conservative, which is voted the #1 most intellectual page of all time. You're welcome, everybody. Again, thank you, Christy, and we'll have to do this again sometime. I mean, when I hear more fracking crap, I'll have you come on and debunk it here.
That would be great.
So thank you so much. Thanks Kevin. Thanks, Grant. Matty.
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you
all very much.
All right.